welcome you all. It's really nice to see so many of you from all around the world here with us today. Our presenter today is Mr. Andy Hewitt from Institute of Construction Claims Practitioners. We're pleased and honored for the Iccp and ACES collaboration. This is our first joint event. We hope that you will enjoy the upcoming webinar. Mr. Hewitt, the floor is yours.
Okay, ladies, thank you so much. And thank you to ACES for inviting the ICCP to give a presentation to you.
You're welcome.
What I would like to do is just start off with a brief introduction to explain to your members what exactly the ICCP is. And then I have a short presentation on construction claims, and then we'll have a question and answer session. So without further ado, thank you, and we'll just start with our introduction to the ICCP. If you are involved in claims, and the ladies told me earlier that the ACES members comprise of both people working on the consultancy side, so you could be the engineer or the contract administrator under the contract, or we also have members from the contracting side. So whichever side you're on, the ICCP, it can be an institute that can help you, and you might consider becoming a member in addition to your ACES membership if you are working with claims. So if you do have responsibility for managing, preparing, or responding to claims, you do need that sort of expertise to do it to a professional standard and to do it correctly to avoid contentions and disputes and to agree the claims amicably without them proceeding to a time-consuming and costly dispute. Now, there are people within the industry, and it's become, if you like, a sub-profession, and people get into claims after being qualified as an engineer, as a quantity surveyor, as a cost control specialist, as a planner, etc., etc. So the ICCP was formed just 6 years ago to promote the good practice in managing, preparing and responding to claims, to help to set a common standard internationally as to what constitutes a well-prepared claim or response so as to avoid these time-consuming and costly disputes. And you know, if you're working on projects, I'm sure you have experienced situations where the parties can't agree on claims and we start falling out and throwing our toys out of pram, and it gets the whole feeling of the project deteriorates. People start to not cooperate, and it's not a harmonious way to actually construct and complete the project. We offer membership at different levels. So someone who would wanting to learn about claims and to gain the experience can join at associate level. Once they've got to a certain standard by experience and or qualifications, they can progress to be a member. And we have fellowship for people who really do know their stuff, have been around for a long time and have been there and done that and got many, many T-shirts. And we are an international community. We've got members probably in more than 30 countries internationally now. Our objectives as an institute are to establish international professional standards for the management of claims. So whether you're looking at claims from the contractor's point of view, from an engineer's point of view as a respondent to the claims, or as an adjudicator or an arbitrator, that we are setting the standards of what should be prepared in terms of claims and responses. As I said earlier, people have become specialists in this subsection within our industry, and we feel that those people that have worked hard, got qualified and got the experience should be given an appropriate accolade to recognise their skills. So this is why they can join and they can use the acronym AICCP, MICCP Extra. And then, of course, we've got to look, and I'm sure ACEs do exactly the same, we've got to look at the people who are just starting in the industry, new graduates, people who are not too experienced. And our professional duty is to help and educate people like that who wish to gain experience in the management of claims. And it may not be people in the 20s who recently graduated. It may be an engineer that's in his 40s or 50s that decided that claims is something that interests him and he wants to switch career paths. So we are governed by a steering committee. I'm the executive officer. We have a president who is elected. We have 3 committee members who are also elected, and we usually have a general manager who at the moment is on maternity leave. So Jen, who you can probably see on screen, is stepping in and taking over Nina's duties. Jen is usually our marketing manager, but she's very versatile and very helpful. So she's looking after a lot of the things that Nina usually looks after. Membership, as I said earlier, is available at associate level, member level, and fellow level. And there are some details there. I don't want to dwell on them, but basically 3 different levels for 3 different skill sets, experience, and qualifications. So what do you get as a member of the ICCP? Well, we give our members access to a library, a knowledge base. So we have things about articles, papers that are related to claims and contractual matters. We keep up to date with what training courses and education might help our members. We have a bookshop where we can guide people where they can go and get reference material related to contracts and claims. As I said earlier, we want to establish standards. So one of the things that we've been developing for the past couple of years are certain templates that you can use on your project. So it might be, what does a claim document look like? What's a working document to actually work out a timeline of what happened leading up to the claim? What should a notice look like? What should a daily site report, what information should that contain? So our members can go to the templates and they can pull these things out and they can use them. And already we're beginning to see them used in the industry. So that's a great accolade. And it's a demonstration that we are providing something that is practical. Our committee members, the people that organise things, are all hands-on people. They're all people that have got the sleeves rolled up and work on projects. They are not theoretical people. They're not lecturers. They're people that you would see on site. We have monthly CPD webinars for the education and knowledge sharing with our members. We have a partnership with a training organisation who give savings on course fees. We've negotiated savings on books with a couple of publishers that specialise in construction publications, and we issue a regular newsletter to keep people updated with what's happening in the industry. As a member, you'll be listed on the ICCP membership list, and we do know that when people are applying for jobs, excuse me, and they put that on their CV that they are a member of the ICCP, this counts for something. It demonstrates to a potential employer that that person has got the qualifications and experience. And we give you a certificate of membership so you can demonstrate that experience, and you are allowed to use the ICP logo on your emails, signatures, correspondence, etc. So, lastly, this rather scary looking gentleman is Simon Rollins. He did say he couldn't find a nicer picture, so we had to go with whatever he's got. And he's a lot nicer than he looks on the photograph. He's a smashing guy, and he's the ICP's regional representative for Serbia. So if you want to discuss anything or you want any information, a lot of it's shown on the website, but Simon is more than happy to have a chat with you or communicate by email, and that's his contact details. So, and thank you to Simon for introducing the ICCP to ACES, and I hope this will be the start of a long-lasting relationship between the two organisations. We're not like other organisations where we think it's a competition between professional organisations. We think that the professional organisations should actually help each other. So that's the benefit of being a small, friendly organisation. So here's the bit that you've all signed up for, and this is my presentation, or our presentation, on construction claims and responses, and how to present either your claim or your response to a claim professionally and, more importantly, effectively, so that it can be accepted by the other party. So let's have a look. Firstly, what is a claim? Well, my definition is that it's an assertion of a party's right under the contract or at law. So it's nothing complicated. If you're a contractor, something's happened on the project, the contract usually, occasionally law, says you're entitled to some compensation. Well, this means that you're only asking for what you're entitled to. So it's a request for something that you are entitled to. So why, if we are in a situation as a contractor and we are asking for something to which we're entitled to, which is in the construction industry, it's going to be extra time, extra payment, or both time and payment. So why is it necessary to produce a properly presented, fully detailed claim, or in fact response to a claim? Well, there are several reasons. If you don't give the person who's responding to the claim the information they need to agree with you, you are not going to get that claim awarded. As an engineer, and you disagree with the claim, and you don't tell the contractor, the claimant, why you disagree with that claim, you are not going to get the contractor to agree with your rejection of the claim. Or in fact, if you agree, yes, Mr. Contractor, you've claimed for 100 days extension of time. I've calculated it and I think it should be 50 days. That's fine. But you've got to convince the contractor that you're right and he's incorrect. So then we've got a basis to agree the extension of time claim. It could be 50, it could be 100. You might just decide to compromise and do a deal at 75. I don't know. But without putting your argument, without putting your claim, without asking for in the right way, you're going to go nowhere. And we'll end up wasting time, money, and if we're not careful, we'll end up in a dispute. And anybody that's been involved in a dispute will realize that these take a long time to resolve. We're putting money into the pockets of lawyers, into the pockets of arbitrators, into the pockets of the seat of arbitration or the courts, when 95% of these things, if they were handled properly, could be settled at project level. This is my experience. And believe me, I've been dealing with claims hands-on for about 20 years. So, what should we do to produce a successful claim? Or everything really that I say about claims also applies to responses to claims. So this is what I call the essential elements of a successful claim. We've got to include details of the cause of the claim. So this will usually be a delay that's happened that affected the time for completion. And it's a delay for which the employer is, maybe he's not caused it himself, but it's something that he is responsible for under the contract, maybe COVID. So this is what's happened. The effect, what effect did this event have on the project? Did it cause the contractor to incur additional costs? to deal with it? Did it cause the contractor a delay? And did that delay affect the time for completion so the contractor is entitled to an extension of time? I think we'll all realise that the contractor can be delayed in many activities, but if they're not on the critical path, they won't affect the time for completion. So has the contractor suffered any loss, any damage, incurred any cost? Well, maybe, but generally not so. The effect could be that the contractor's had to do additional work, so it's a variation. So he needs paying for the additional work. Maybe the variation also delayed the time for completion. So it needs an extension of time. Because he's been forced to remain on site for an extended period, maybe he's entitled to the payment of his time-related or prolongation costs. So these are all the things that we've got to look at that may arise out of a single event. And just because it's a variation, we've got three possible claims: claim for the additional work, claim for an extension of time, claim for prolongation costs. So this is what I mean by demonstrating the effect of the event on the project. And of course, just because there's been, for example, a delay, or the contractors had to pay additional costs because of something, it doesn't mean that the contractor's entitled to make a claim. If his tower crane breaks down and the tower crane is needed for a critical path activity, can he claim an extension of time? Well, not usually. If the contractor's labour goes on strike, or just works slowly, or he doesn't meet his targets, can he claim an extension of time? Well, again, not usually. So we've got to demonstrate in the claim that whatever happened on the project, the cause, the contractor is entitled to make a claim. And it could be the entitlement could generally arises through one of the conditions of contract, but it could occasionally be through a matter of law. And the final essential element is substantiation. Just like a lawyer going into court, he goes into court to convince the jury that everything that he says, every fact that he relies on, is true. And we've got to do this within our claim. Why do we have to do this? Because the engineer, when he's checking the claim and verifying it is correct, will need to do his job, has got to check that the facts as presented in the claim are correct. So if the contractor says, we were given an instruction which comprises a variation and that delayed us and we had to do some additional work, that's just a statement. Unless the contractor goes on and says, and a copy of the instructions is appended as Exhibit 3. Now the engineer can, or the DAB, can go to Appendix 3 and say, oh yes, this is an instruction by the engineer, dated this, and it does instruct the contractor to do this, and this is additional work. So we've got to substantiate the effect, the cause, what happened, calculations, invoices if we're claiming for costs. So try and remember, if you're dealing with a claim, either from the contractor's point of view or the engineer's point of view as a respondent, sees cause, effect, entitlement, and substantiation. And these need to be well presented and clearly presented within your claim or your response. So let's have a look at in a little bit more detail of each of these. The cause is what happened on the project. An instruction to do additional work, a delay caused by something that the employer is responsible to, lots and lots of things. COVID, exceptionally adverse climatic conditions, you name it, the contract generally got a list of these things. And the details of this, if your contract administration is set up correctly, should be available from the project records. So we've got the instruction, we've got the correspondence, we've got the notices, that the contractor should have sent. The effect. What effect the event had on the project in terms of time and in terms of money. So we talked about an extension of time. The event that happened has to not only delay the contractor's activities, but if we're going for an extension of time, it has to delay the time for completion. Otherwise, there is no extension of time. We've got to demonstrate if the contractor's incurred additional costs. We've got to demonstrate what those costs were and why they were incurred. Entitlement, we've talked about this already, but basically, does the contract entitle the contractor to make the claim for the compensation, either the time or the money for the event in question? And finally, every statement made or fact relied upon in the claim should be substantiated so that the respondent can verify what you have presented in your claim. So that's C's. Oh, and substantiation again will often be, will always be available from the project records. And this is a reminder to contractors and engineers to make sure that your contract administrations are set up properly and efficiently for the taking, maintaining and recording what is going on the project. So everything from daily, weekly, monthly reports, notices, correspondence, submittal logs, payment applications, payment certificates, etc., etc., etc. If you get yourself in a claims situation and you don't have good records, you are going to struggle. Same for engineers. If you don't agree that things happen and you don't have the records to substantiate why you disagree, you're going to struggle to reject or reduce the contractor's claim. So, we talked about C's, and I wanted to go on and give you certain key points to remember when you are preparing your claim or your response. So key point number one, make the reviewer's job as easy and pleasant as possible. And we'll go on to talk about ways that you can do this in a little while. But those of you who are working on the consultant side, who have dealt with a contractor's claim and had to make a response to a contractor's claim, just think about this. If you've got a nicely presented document that everything is easily found, you've got all the information that you need to understand the basis of the contractor's claim, to check the delay analysis, to check the cost calculations, and it's clearly presented and explained, makes your job easy. If you just presented with a file with a load of rubbish just thrown in there, and the contractors, the claimants made no real effort to explain cause, effect, entitlement, or substantiate anything, well, it doesn't make your job very easy, and your sympathy is not going to be with the person who's made your life difficult. And to be honest, if the claimant, and remember that the onus is on the claimant to prove that the claim is correct, if the claimant doesn't go to the trouble to present a document that can be properly understood, he really doesn't deserve to have an award. And my response would be, you haven't proved on the balance of probabilities that your claim is just, therefore I have no choice but to reject it. If you want to resubmit it and do a professional job, well, I'll look at it again, but on the basis of what you submitted, I can't approve it. Key point number two, ensure that the submission is a standalone document. So what we're looking for here is that everything that the engineer will need to examine the claim, to understand the claim, to understand and check the calculations, the delay analysis or the cost calculations or the measurements or the evaluation, whatever it is there within the claim submission. We do not want the engineer to have to get up from his desk and go to the document control room to look for things. or get on Acronix and try to find that notice that the claim refers to. It's not his job to do that. His job is to evaluate what you've presented. So you need to do him a favor, make his job as easy and pleasant as possible, and give him all the information he needs to hopefully say yes to your claim. Key point number 3. You are not writing the claim to be responded to by your opposite number on the project. Maybe the guy that you have coffee with or go outside for a cigarette with a couple of times a week and you're pretty good friends with, and you see him at the meetings and all the rest of it. He knows what's been happening on the project. Probably not in as much detail as you, because you know the details surrounding the claim. But is he the person that's going to have the final say on whether your claim is awarded or not? Maybe, maybe not. It may be a complicated issue. He may refer it to someone in the head office that's got a lot more experience because he's not a specialist on claims. The engineer, the employer, may bring in a specialist claims consultant to advise and to help to respond to the claim. So will they understand it? If it's not settled amicably and it goes to the DAB, will the DAB be able to understand it? So we need to write our claim and present the claim so that someone with no prior knowledge of the project or the claim or the circumstances can understand it from A to B. Moving on, key point number 4, the last key point. I have sat down and I've read claims because I've worked probably equally for contractors preparing claims and for employers and consultants responding to claims and as an adjudicator. And sometimes when I read the claims, not so much the responses, because the responses go the other way. There's generally not enough information in the responses, but contractors' claim. They've given me a van full of information. There's piles of files and papers and documents on my desk, and I'm supposed to make sense of it. Well, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to be able to make sense of it if it's not properly explained. And just putting a load of papers in a file and giving them to the engineer is not going to help your case. So what we've got to do when we prepare our claim is think very, very carefully of the points we need to make to substantiate and to establish cause, effect, and entitlement, and keep to the point. Sometimes I've read claims and the narrative goes on for pages and pages and pages, and I lose the will to live. And it's not relevant. It's actually just rubbish. It's quantity, not quality. Now, apart from an annoying me as the person who's responding to the claim, that, okay, it is important, but what if, because there's so much information, it confuses me? What if it prevents me from understanding the real issues? Am I going to make an award if I don't understand it? Well, probably not. Well, certainly not. If I'm confused about it, because I've got to be able to say with my hand on my heart, Mr. Employer, the contractor is entitled to an extension of time of 58 days because, and prolongation costs of $58,000 because, and I cannot do that unless I understand the claim from A to Z. So don't put irrelevant information in your claim. If you write something, you review it, and you're thinking to yourself, is it really adding anything to the claim? Is it relevant? Well, you've got to take the hard decision. It might have taken you half an hour to write it, half a day to write it. If it's not adding anything to the claim, press delete and get rid of it, because it will actually have not add any value to your claim. It will actually detract from your claim. So how do we comply with the 4 key points? Well, firstly, if you're going for an interview and this is a job that you really want, it will give you a great salary, it's a career progression, the rest of it, you will probably take the time to put on your best suit, a nice pressed shirt, a smart tie, polish your shoes. And why are you doing this? Because you want to create a good impression to your potential employer and the people who are interviewing you. It's exactly the same with a claim submission or a response document. Should be professionally presented. We should ensure that the document is user-friendly. I think you probably understand that a claim will consist of a narrative which tells the story and leads the reviewer by the hand through what happened. But then it will contain other documents, look as the substantiating document, the exhibits, delay analysis programs, baseline program, calculations, measurements, cost calculations, build-ups and backups to the cost calculations, invoices and payroll to substantiate the cost calculation. So a lot of information. So it needs to be properly ordered, indexed, and it can be easily found by the engineer who needs to think, okay, they're saying the cost of employing the project manager for an extra 58 days is this much. I need to check that. Oh yes, there's the cost calculations. This is a calculation of the daily cost. And here's his contract of employment or payroll information to verify that is the project manager's salary, etc., etc. So you're helping yourself by helping the engineer. So that's basically what we say here. Ensure that the submission document's well ordered and properly indexed to enable a reviewer to quickly find the accompanying documents. Another good tip is to present your narrative in one volume, your story, and then all the backup documentation, the programs, the calculations, the exhibits, the invoices, etc., in a separate volume. The reason for this is because whoever's reading it can be reading the story, and when it says the project manager costs this much per day, you can then go to the other file and it can say, okay, without losing his place in the story, it's a small thing, but all these small things will add up. It's like polishing your shoes before you go to the interview. That's just one part of the whole picture. Ensure that the narrative is easy to read and understand. So one of the things is you are not trying to impress the other party with your knowledge of legal terms, of contractual language. You're not trying to convince the other party that you're a very clever person. The job that you're trying to do is just to explain what happened if you're the contractor, or why you disagree or you do agree if you're the engineer. And the best way to do that is keep your narrative writing simple and direct. If you've got a point to make, say it clearly and concisely. Don't hide it and hope that the person will come to a conclusion. One of my pet hates, and I've just been reading a contract for a job we're working on for a contractor, and the contract itself is full of abbreviations and acronyms, and I'm trying to make sense of some of the contract clauses, and I have no clue. I had to find a list of definitions of the acronyms and abbreviations that are used, and it's 2 pages long. So as I'm reading a contract clause and I'm trying to understand it, and then get to a full stop and it says something like CUP. What's CUP? I don't know. Yes, I can go to the list of abbreviations, but it's spoiling my flow. And actually scientifically been proven that the use of acronyms and abbreviations will be a hindrance to someone trying to understand, because subconsciously they have to switch off reading and understanding what they are reading and convert CUP mentally to, oh yes, central utility plant. And even that only takes a split second, it still is not doing the reader any favors. So avoid the use of acronyms and abbreviations. avoid legalese and unnecessary complicated language. This is something that claims consultants, of which I am one myself, tend to try and make big themselves up, justify their fees by using very, very complicated language. Now, when I was a young claims consultant 20 years ago, I was working on I had a client that I used to look after, and he wanted a job doing, and I was busy and unable to do it. So I asked a colleague to prepare this report. Next time I went to see the client, I said, "Was the report okay?" He said, "You didn't prepare that report, did you?" And I said, "No, I didn't. My colleague Alan did it." He said, "It's full of Latin." Okay. And I realized that Alan is one of these people that likes to elevate his own importance, if you like. He says, for example, it says inter alia. What does inter alia mean? I said, well, it means amongst other things. He said, I know that, but the engineer is from Taiwan. Would he know that? Why not just write any other things? Very good point for me to learn early on in my claims career. And I actually, because I've worked internationally, and I am often dealing with people where English is not their first language, I have the advantage, because it is my language, is I deliberately, I want to say dumb it down, but it's not dumbing it down. It's keep things simple so that anybody can understand it. What I sometimes say is try to explain what you're saying in the same way as you would explain it to a 12-year-old child. And if you can get that level of understanding, some of the engineers I've worked with don't have the understanding of a 12-year-old child. I apologize. But yeah, I mean, we keep it simple, because if it's not understood properly, you're not going to get anywhere, whether it's a claim or a response. You will notice when you're reading a contract and you're looking at the contract clauses, it will always say, and I'm going to use FIDIC, the parties that work on the FIDIC contracts, it will say the engineer that, the contractor that, the employer this, the contractor, the engineer, the employer. Doesn't use words like they, he, it. It's always the party by name. And the reason for that, in any contract, we've got to avoid ambiguity and misunderstanding. So if you say the engineer is obliged to do this, or the engineer shall do this, there's no doubt about who we're referring to. So don't refer to them, him, it. Refer to the parties, either by their titles, the employer, the engineer, the contractor, or by the names of the companies. So there's no opportunity for misunderstanding who we're talking about. Use the narrative to lead the reader to a logical conclusion. This is something that I see. It's when a contractor, or in fact an engineer, presents a document and he does a job 70% okay. They do a great job of presenting the facts. They'll give a chronology of events. On this date, this happened. On this date, the engineer instructed the contractor to do this. On this date, the contractor sent a notice which says this, da, 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 da. Now, correspondence obviously very often doesn't tell its own story. The project records don't sometimes explain what's happened to someone with no prior knowledge. So we have to explain. The engineer issued an instruction, reference 123, on the 25th of February. The instruction was to this comprises a substantial amount of additional work. Materials had to be procured, delivered, and the contractor had to build this into his program. Now, part of this is fact. The second is you explaining the effect, what happened to the contractor because of the factual thing, which was the instruction. Once we've told our story, it's important then to summarize it and bring it to a conclusion. So after a couple of pages of saying what happened, we need to say, consequently, the instruction to do this, caused the contractor to have to undertake all these additional activities, which in turn led to a delay. And we need to explain. So we've got to lead the reader by the hand through the story, and then, I'm going to talk about this in a bit as well, lead it to a logical conclusion. The logical conclusion should be, at the end of the claim, is, therefore, we are entitled to an extension of time of X number of days and payment of prolongation costs of X number of dollars. And this is what I'm coming on to. Explain the conclusions that you would like the reader to reach. If we just give them the bare facts and hope that the reader will interpret those facts correctly, we're not doing our job. And that's why I said it's a 70% job. The extra 30% is where the skill comes in the storytelling, the narrative writing, to say, therefore, we are entitled to an extension of time of this, an additional payment of this. Get out of that, engineer. Or the obverse is, we reject your claim because of this reason, that reason, that reason, that reason. Get out of that, Mr. Contractor. And just to underline it, never let the reader draw their own conclusions. You must tell them precisely what they must think, even if they don't agree with you. We've talked about the components of a claim. One part is the narrative or the story, and then we have all the other documents, the exhibits, the delay analysis programs, the calculations, the measurements, the invoices, etc., etc. And very often, and I've seen it so many times, a claim will arrive on my desk. We've got a nice story, very good, makes sense, clearly explained. Then we've got another file with a load of stuff in it. But the story doesn't tell me what this stuff is. It says there's a delay analysis, and the delay analysis shows that the contract's been delayed by 30 days, but it doesn't tell me how the delay analysis has been performed. It doesn't tell me what sort of delay analysis it is. It doesn't tell me this. It doesn't explain how the measurements have been taken, what the drawings. So it's apparent that the person that prepared the story has not talked to the delay analyst who's prepared the delay analysis program, or the quantity surveyor that's prepared the cost calculations, because they are two entirely separate documents. Sometimes they're not even called the same thing. The story might say a time impact analysis. The actual program that I'm looking at doesn't say time impact analysis, it says delay program. How am I supposed to understand this? So we need to explain how the delay analysis has been carried out and its findings, how the calculations have been carried out and what they mean. And I've sort of covered that. I ensure that the logic contained in the supporting calculations is explained clearly. If you've ever looked at a cost claim or a variation claim, and you're given a spreadsheet, and the person who's prepared it hasn't even bothered to label the columns, so it's just a spreadsheet full of numbers. I don't know. Are they hours, cubic meters, linear meters, money, dollars? Whatever the currency is in Serbia, euros, I don't know. We've got all these numbers on a piece of paper. What do they mean? Where have the numbers come from? I am not going to award an amount of money if I can't, with hand on heart, say to the employer that I've audited the calculations and I am convinced that they are reasonable. And if you don't give me the information to do that, Mr. Claimant, I can't do that. Excuse me 1 minute. We talked about substantiation. So substantiation comes through copies of the project records, included in any other documents, but we need to ensure that every fact we rely on in the story, statements made in the story, the cost calculations are substantiated from the records, the invoices, etc., etc. Another thing that is very, very powerful is that instead of saying clause 8.4 gives us entitlement to an extension of time for exceptionally adverse climatic conditions, full stop. Well, if the engineer's familiar with the contract, he may be able to agree with that. But if he's not a contract specialist, and he's got to go and find FIDIC, and he's got to look 8.4 up, and he's got to say, well, is the contractor's statement correct? Well, it's not making his job easy. But if we say clause 8.4 says, and I can't remember the wording, but we quote the wording from 8.4, we identify it as a quotation. I always like to use quote marks and italics. The engineer is going to say, oh yes, that comes out of the contract, therefore it must be true. It's the same when we're quoting from letters, notices, site meeting minutes. If we use quotations rather than just saying it was agreed that, well, quote the actual thing that was agreed from the letter as stated in letter whatever reference this day as follows, quotation, is very, very powerful. And it was going to convince whoever's reading the claim that this is factual. It's not you twisting the meaning to make it suit your claim or your response. And on the same topic, when you are using quotations, make sure that the reader knows it's a quotation. As I said, I like to use quote marks and italics. When you've actually told your story and you've got your programs and you've got your exhibits, you've got your calculations, you've got everything, everything's filed, the temptation is to go, phew, glad that's finished. I've been working on it for days or weeks. Let's get it submitted to the engineer. No. The reason why I've just said no is because if you've been working on it for days and weeks, you've been on the project for a year or 18 months, you know what's happened inside out, upside down and backwards. But our claim has got to be understood by somebody that's not familiar with the project or the circumstances leading to the claim. They need to understand it. And it's very, very easy to assume, even inadvertently, that what you say will be understood by that person with no prior knowledge. So, and it's also true that if you've written something and you read it yourself, you will read what you think you've written rather than what you have actually written. I've written a couple of books, and it always surprises me when it goes for professional copy editing, the copy editor will come up with things and suggestions. I didn't write that. Well, I did, but I don't think I've written it, even though I've read it several times. So a peer review. So it could be one of your colleagues. It could be someone back in their head office that's got specialist knowledge. It could be, hopefully, somebody with not a lot of knowledge about the claim, because if they can understand it, the opposite number is going to understand it. We sometimes ask to do peer reviews for our clients. We've prepared our claim. Would you have a look at it and give us advice? Is it okay? Do we need to change anything? Do we need to improve it? Does it do what it should do? Sometimes our advice is you need to throw it away and start again. Here's a proposal for us to do it properly. Now, responses and determinations. Every claim needs a response, despite what the engineer might think. That's, oh, claims are difficult to deal with. Let's put it in the drawer and hope it goes away. It won't. It will need a response of some thought. So really everything that we've talked about in terms of preparing a claim, all that work, all that information, telling a story, bringing it to a conclusion, cause, effect, entitlement, substantiation, needs to apply equally to a response. Are you surprised here, contractors? Because generally, I bet the responses that you get are 1 or 2 pages that said, dear Mr. Contractor, your claim is rejected, full stop. They don't explain why, or if they do explain why, it's probably meaningless. It's just excuses. It's not a meaningful response. Engineers, are you guilty of this? Are your colleagues guilty of this? I guess there's one or two people thinking, maybe. Anyway, so in summary, you're preparing a response. It's not going to be a 1 or 2 page document. It's going to be possibly as big an important document as the claim itself was, because your job, Mr. Engineer, is to try and reach agreement on the claim between the contractor and the employer. And if you don't explain your findings correctly to the contractor, he is not going to accept them. And if you don't explain your findings to the employer, if you are recommending an award, he is going to be reluctant to award anything, pay anything, unless you convinced him that the contractor is entitled to something, what you said is, under the terms of the contract. And if you can do that with the employers, most employers, they'll always be the ones that don't want to give anything under any circumstances, but most employers, if you, the engineer, have said, in my professional opinion, a contract is or is not entitled to this, or is entitled to this, it's not what he's asking for, but here are my reasons for saying it's this, they will be accepted. And your job, Mr. Engineer, is to avoid disputes, not contribute to disputes by giving meaningless responses to claims. So, just to remind ourselves, what are the main points? C's: cause, effect, entitlement, substantiation. Even if the claim doesn't deal with them, your response must deal with them. It needs to be user-friendly, so the employer and the contractor can understand your response. It needs to be a standalone document. It needs to contain all the information so that the contractor, the employer, the DAB, the arbitrator, the judge, the jury, the king, the queen can understand it from the information that you've presented. And it should lead to a logical conclusion. So therefore, Mr. Contractor, your claim for 100 days is rejected, but we have recalculated it based on A, B, and C, and we consider a fair award under the contract is 50 days. You've given the reasons why, and that is the logical conclusion. So, I think that brings us nicely to question time. And I think the ladies at ACES will have been, let me just set a couple of rules for questions. Can you please ensure that, first of all, you use the Q&A box rather than the general chat box? And secondly, can you make sure it's on topic, either in connection with the ICCP or presentation of claims and responses? So I'm at your disposal. It's very quiet.
We are now checking the chat. There's nothing there yet.
Hi, Andy. I have a question.
Hello, Steve.
I was wondering, because I think that was an excellent presentation. Thank you very much for that. But I was wondering, do you have any facts or statistics? Because obviously the name of the game is to avoid dispute if possible. But just to kind of further elaborate on that, I know that Arcadis, for example, they publish an annual report, but what's the average cost of a dispute, for example, or if an arbitration?
Yeah, good point, Simon. I was wondering whether you're going to ask who's going to win at the rugby this weekend, but obviously it's going to be England and not Wales. But yeah, the average cost of a dispute is something like $120,000 to $150,000 per day of arbitration. So, we're assuming it goes to arbitration and there's not a DAB. So if we've got $150,000 a day and we've got a 10-day arbitration, that's, work it out for yourself. 1,500, yeah, 1.5 million, yeah? Now, that includes the arbitration fees, the court fees, the depending on the jurisdiction for the arbitration, maybe the Chamber of Commerce fees, the expert witness fees, the specialist that the contractor needs to assist him with the claim, the specialist that the respondent needs to assist him with the rebuttal of the claim. So we can soon get up to a lot of money. And do we want to put that money into the pocket of lawyers and arbitrators, or would it be better, as been seen on, a reduction in the project cost for the employer, or or additional profit on the project for the contractor? The way to avoid that is, one of the ways to avoid it, is to make sure that your claims are properly prepared and submitted, and the same goes for the responses. Because both Arcadis and HKA have carried out over several years a survey and presented a report on global disputes. And consistently, one of the main reasons for disputes, costly and time-consuming disputes, is inadequately expressed claims. And this could well be that the contractor has got entitlement, but he's just done a really, really bad job of proving that he's got that entitlement and proving the amount of compensation. And the same applies to the engineers responding to the claims. Maybe they've got good reasons to reject it or to reduce the value of the claim, but they haven't explained it properly. Therefore, nobody agrees to it, and therefore we ended up in a dispute. So yeah, very good point, Simon. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thanks, Andy. That was a very informative response. In my experience, certainly in recent years, I'm working on the FIDIC engineering on the consultancy side. And I can say that in my personal experience, I'm still surprised at the poor quality of claims are submitted. But given the fact of the numbers that are at stake and the cost of not submitting a properly prepared claim, it's just surprising that that not more effort is put in up front to avoid that cost.
Well, we get this a lot. I explained that, one of my businesses, I'm a partner in a consultancy business, and part of the services that we provide is firstly preparing claims on behalf of contractors, and the other side is responding to claims on behalf of employers. And, we'll get asked to put a proposal in, a fee proposal for preparing a claim. We will prepare it to a good standard because we're specialists, in the same way as, an electrical engineer will design something that it doesn't fizzle out and blow up. Yeah, we have to do what we do because we're specialists in what we do. And then we put the fee proposal in and you say, oh, that's a lot of money. I say, well, okay, what are your delay penalties if you don't get your extension of time? Well, $5 million. Okay, well, our fees for saving you $5 million are a percentage of a percentage. So it's not really a lot of money, is it? So, hey, you can't beat some logic sometimes. People don't want to spend a few $1,000s to save a few $1 million. And I've stopped being surprised at the attitude of potential clients, both contractors and employers.
Okay, we have a few questions in the chat area. Is there a case that an employer could trigger a claim?
Yes, I mean, everything there depends on the contract. If we look at FIDIC, and I know that FIDIC is used in Serbia. I don't know if it's the most popular form of contract, but I obviously don't know if other forms of contract are used there. My expertise is in FIDIC, but if we look in FIDIC, there's something like, and I sound like a bit like a geek here, but I happen to know there's 11 clauses in the Red Book that entitle the employer to claim from the contractor. So yes, there are clauses, but we need to look in the contract to see under what circumstances the employer can claim and what is entitled to claim for.
We have one more question. Hello, and thank you for the insightful webinar. Sorry to take you back, but I would like to know the process of certification of claim expert by ICCP.
Okay, that's an interesting question, because claim experts, or even people that want to become claim experts and be recognized as such, they tend to be people with grey hair or no hair that have been around the industry. They tend to be qualified engineers, architects, quantity surveyors, etc., etc., sometimes coming from the project control side. So they've got their degree, let's say, in engineering. They've worked on site or in a design office. They've earned their qualifications through experience. And then, for whatever reason, they've started to deal with contractual matters and claims. So by this time, they're going to be in the 30s. More often than not, they are going to be in the 40s or the 50s. So the ICCP decided that those people should be able to join based on experience. So when they apply for memberships of the ICCP, depending on which level you're applying for, they need to demonstrate that they have a degree in a construction industry project, so engineering, architecture, quantity surveying, construction law, whatever. They need to demonstrate that they've worked on construction projects, either client side or contractor side, for a certain number of years, and they need to demonstrate that they have dealt with claims either as a major part of their responsibility or maybe as a more managing role for a certain number of years. And that is the basis of the eligibility for membership. Some time ago, we had a barrister from the UK who wanted to join, and the membership secretary, it was before Jen was around, but the membership secretary, we got this barrister, he's got qualifications coming out of his ears, and he wants to join the ICCP, but he doesn't work in construction. So I had a look at all the details, and you're right. He didn't work in construction. He got no construction knowledge. He's a pretty qualified lawyer. So could he join the Institute of Construction Claims Practitioners? Well, I had to say no, because he doesn't know anything about construction. Seemed to be one of these guys that just likes to collect certificates and qualifications to big himself up. So I had to say to a barrister, sorry, you don't really qualify to be an ICCP member.
Okay, we have one more question. If an engineer has responded to a claim to a contractor and stated that if the contractor does not agree, then he can raise it to the clause of DAB. Does this imply that the engineer has exposed the employer into a dispute?
The engineer is firstly, and I'm talking FIDIC here, the engineer has got to respond to the claim. That's the first thing he's got to do. So Mr. Contractor and Mr. Employer, these are my findings after I have investigated the contractor's claim. You're not responding just to the contractor, you are giving this information to the employer as well. Once you've issued your findings in your response, you are obliged to meet with the parties. I always like to get the parties together around a table, not meet with them separately, and say, look, okay, Mr. Contractor, this is what I think. Do you agree? If you don't agree, tell me why, and I'll take what you're saying into account. Mr. Employer, this is what I think. Do you agree? Tell me why you don't agree. What are we doing there? We're getting a dialogue going, and hopefully, at that point, the employer and the contractor can say, well, you know, okay, I'm willing to knock X number of days off my extension to time claim if you'll give us this. And the employer says, well, yeah, you're doing a good job, Mr. Contractor. We don't totally agree with what we're saying here, but, you know, can we compromise, shake hands and get on with building the job? Yes, fine. Engineer's doing his job, perfect. If we can't agree, at this point, or after listening to the arguments put forward by the contractor and the employer, and the engineer can't get them to agree, the engineer's got to produce a formal determination and issue it as a formal notice. We've tried to agree, this is what I think is the correct position, taking into account the contract and the circumstances, and that then becomes formal. Now, either the employer or the contractor at that point can say, so I still don't agree with your determination, Mr. Engineer, I need to refer this to the DAB, or I'd intend to refer this to arbitration if there's no DAB on the project. So in my experience, the engineers don't actually perform their obligations correctly under the contract when they are responding to claims and attempting to reach agreement or determining the matters. Why? Very often it's because they don't understand that they're their obligations under the contract, or they're not qualified to do it or experienced enough to do it. So I hope that answers your question.
This is the last question that we have for now. Does the ICCP help an employer to select or hire dispute review board members or dispute review expert members?
No, and the reason is because one of the ICCP's principles is to avoid claims. We believe that if you submit your claim and it's prepared and submitted properly, if you've got just cause, if your claim's a proper claim, it's a just claim and not just one of these made up ones, hoping that you'll get something. So if you submit it properly, and if the engineer responds properly to a proper standard, you'll never get to a dispute. And I'm very, very proud, working in claims for many, many years, that the number of arbitrations, that claims that I've been involved in, either from the contractor side or the employer side, that have proceeded to a dispute is that many, 2. Now, I've dealt with an awful lot of claims, but this is what we do at the ICCP. We avoid claims. We don't avoid claims. We try to avoid disputes at all costs by doing a proper job with the claim. Now, the ICCP, therefore, if you like, divorces itself from disputes. We're dispute avoidance people. So yes, a lot of our members will get involved in disputes because it's inevitable, so they need to know a little bit about disputes. But no, we don't recommend adjudicators, we don't recommend arbitrators, we don't keep a list. And the reason for that is that you can go to FIDIC, you can go to the Dispute Review Board Foundation, or the DRBF, the other one, one's in America, one's in Switzerland, and they have panels of adequately qualified and experienced people. We don't really need another panel. If you want a good claims practitioners, well, we don't have registers of them, but we can help to steer you in the right direction.
We don't have any more questions in the chat area, but we do invite you all to ask questions if you have some.
Now, sometimes worrying, either if we don't have many questions, I wonder whether that's because nobody's understood anything and they don't want to embarrass themselves, or hopefully I've explained myself very, very well, just as a good claim should do, and I've answered all your questions in my presentation.
We believe it's the second thing you said.
Cross is the second one, yeah.
Okay, here is another one. Can a DAB be triggered if there is no claim filed? Example, contractor is refusing to design the building in a design and build project.
Yeah, a DAB is not just there to adjudicate and give decisions on claims. If it's a matter of the obligations, the contractor is saying, it's not my job to design this. The employer, the engineer, is saying, it is your job to design it. Well, you can refer that. It's not a claim. you can refer that and say, Mr. DAB or Mr. DAB panel, please tell us what you think is the correct solution. Is the contractor obliged to do the design, or is he not? Give us the benefit of your experience. This is dispute avoidance, isn't it?
Thank you, Andy. No more questions.
Well, I think in that case, I have to thank you for inviting the ICCP to present to your members, and me personally, and just to say that it's been an absolute pleasure. I love helping people, advising people, and giving people advice. I like this sort of thing, so I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope this is going to be the first of many interactions between the ICCP and ACES. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Andy, for this informative and very useful webinar. It was a pleasure collaborating with you, and hopefully we will do something new very soon.